the speaker again, boy. I find we was getting a lot of feedback just now. Testing. One.
UNC official met any PDP official?
You don't need the UNC to pass the bill.
This is the worst and they need to go.
Fire burn you, Guardian. How much more could we tolerate?
You lack the intellect and the competence.
Everywhere else is vaccinating except Trinidad and Tobago.
You cannot pay people money that you owe them.
Good evening, pleasant good evening to our viewers joined on a virtual link or UNC page and others. We are this evening discussing the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Act and why it should be repealed. I join the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar together with all my parliamentary colleagues who have also done similar type discussions as to why the Procurement Act of 2020 should be repealed. Joining me this afternoon is quite a number of distinguished gentlemen in their own respective fields. This evening we have the chairman of the Kuva Tabakit Talpari Regional Corporation, Chairman Henry Awang, who has been in local government for approximately 20 years and has amassed quite a number of years of experience in local government. On the set, we also have Councillor John Lizama, who is also a small contractor engaged in public in vying for public goods and services. Additionally, we are also joined by two persons via our virtual link. First being economist and banker, former Senator Tahaka Obika, who will be joining us shortly, together with young, dynamic, and brilliant attorney at law, Arvind Arjun Singh. So, why repeal the procurement legislation? And to answer that question as to why there's need to repeal, we must understand how did we get here. So therefore, before I pass you on to other speakers, I will take you back briefly into the history of how the procurement legislation, the newest amendment, came to be. During the years of the Manning regime from 2002 to 2010, you all may recall there was an overheating of the construction industry where a number of high-rise buildings and projects were being undertaken at quite significant cost overruns. For example, the Brian Lara Stadium, the SAPA, the NAPA, and others. And very early on in her term as Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar met with members of the joint JCC and others who indicated that they were owed in excess of $6 or $7 billion. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago was owing contractors in excess of $6 or $7 billion. And this required some intervention because that amount of monies being owed to contractors required an intervention. And at some of those meetings, or at one of those meetings, it was suggested that why not change or implement the Public Procurement Act or bring that into fruition, because we as a country has been operating under the Central Tenders Board Act, Chapter 7191, an act of I believe the year 1971. So we've been operating under Central Tenders Board Act for all these years, and there was need for public procurement in Trinidad and Tobago so that there would be good governance, namely accountability, transparency, value for money, and integrity in the procurement of public goods and services. So what did Kamala Prasad-Bissessar do? They drafted through her, under her guidance and with her team, including Attorney General, they drafted the Public Procurement Act, which went to the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, wherein the PNM refused to participate. And I can see why today that they refused to participate, because public procurement that calls for accountability and transparency is something that they never intended to be part of. They will rather soul select their friends, family, wives, and financiers for public goods and services. And I'm sure our panelists today will give you a myriad of examples in which such activities are happening today and has been happening for the past 6 years. So after the bill became an act of parliament in early 2015, it was certain parts were proclaimed while others required operationality. So therefore, certain parts were proclaimed and others were to come on a stage basis. What we have seen over the years is on at least 2 to 3 occasions, the PNM has brought legislation to water down the public procurement bill. First, we saw, I believe in 2016, where the security of tenure, the term of office, the contract term of the procurement regulator was reduced to 3 years. That was one of their first act. Secondly, in December last year, this is where they watered down and they gutted. And what they did is that they watered down the procurement legislation, the Procurement Act, wherein a number of services will now be exempt from the purview of the procurement regulator. Things like legal services, financial services or debt financing services, accounting and auditing, medical services, and this is where it gets very interesting, such other services as the minister by order determine. So that is also very frightening for Trinidad and Tobago. If you are patriotic to Trinidad and Tobago, we all know that public procurement, and when there's competition in the delivery or the provision of a good or service, there's better services, there's better prices, there's better quality, there's better delivery time, and the list goes on and on. They have now attempted to remove all these services from the purview of the procurement regulator, and civil society has been crying out for better from the PNM government led by Christopher Rowley, and we are here this afternoon to hear the views of the panelists, independent panelists who have gathered here and who have been also calling for better procurement. So right away that is how we have come to this position. Right away, I'll ask Chairman Awong, who has been in local government for approximately 20 years, who knows the ins and outs, and by his experience knows procurement in the local government fraternity inside out, I will say. So Chairman Awong, can you describe for us, the procurement practice in local government or any local government fraternity as you understand it?
Thank you very much, MP Arnold Ram. And let me start from the very onset, indicate that I'm very happy to share my thoughts on this particular matter that is engaging the national community at this point in time. Also a special good evening to my panelist colleagues on here on the set, and also to the listening and viewing public. In my almost 20 years as a local government practitioner, and more so as a public official, not only to represent the interests of those who would have elected me within my electoral district as a councillor, but most importantly, though, is to manage the state funds that is allocated to the regional corporations on an annual basis. The regional corporation is not an income generating organization. We are dependent on central government to allocate funding for us to carry out our operation, our daily and I could say monthly operations at the corporations. After the budget is read, the corporation will know what was allocated to under the various heads and subheads for the corporation. The council will then meet and decide on the projects going forward under the various heads. After that is done and the council approve the projects, the CEO, in our case through her technical arm of the corporation, would do the necessary estimates for those said projects. When that is completed, it is then sent to the it comes back to the council for approval. After the council approves the estimate, it then goes to the Ministry of Local Government for the ministry to send their their project officers to look at the projects. They will come and look at the projects and verify whether the project is one that we can move forward with, and they will say yes or no to the projects. Let me just remind you that the corporation technical arm consists of an engineer, a county superintendent, RO3, RO2, RO1s, and I think this process of the project having to go to the ministry for the Ministry of Local Government to send project officers to determine whether or not we can go forward with the project is a total waste of time, in my opinion. However, when that is done and the project officers from the ministry indicate that the projects are okay and we can move forward with it, it is then sent to the Ministry of Finance for release of funds for the particular projects. That can be very timely. It can take a lot of times to reach from that point, from the point of request for releases or the request for funding to the point when we actually get the funds. When that is done and the corporation gets approval for funds, we then invite tenders, and those those invitations will go out on at least one newspaper. When that's done, we invite tenders through that process, and when that's finished, then there's the evaluation process to take place based on the tenders that would come in. Now, there are different levels of projects. Projects that are 300,000 and less will be, the CEO can award those. Those between 300,000 and 500,000, it is done by the SMTC award, which is the Special Ministerial Tenders Committee award. That's at the Ministry of Local Government. They award those. Anything over 500,000 then goes to the CTB for CTB awards. That process can be very time-taking in the sense that I remember well when the fiscal year was removed from the 1st of January to the 1st of October. It was said then one of the main reasons why that was done is for us to capitalize on the dry season. So when we go through this whole process, I said most time we are into the rainy season. But it's a process that we have to go through. The evaluation committee will make their decision based on the size of the projects, meaning the cost of the projects. They look at a number of things, like in the case of the CEO's award, I can speak to that. You look at the capacity of the contractor to deliver. So basically, in a nutshell, that is the process, to procure goods and services in the corporation.
Thank you, um, Chairman Awong. And what Chairman Awong has now described is quite a comprehensive procedure for the provision of goods and services. And what you find is that when procurement happens in this way, then there's competition, and competition drive prices down. And we can use one analogy here. I remember the price of cement. The price of cement was skyrocketing in Trinidad and Tobago. It had reached close to 70 to 80 dollars per bag, and entered rock hard cement. And because there was competition for the TCL brand of cement from rock hard, immediately the prices went down, and they started to settle around 40 to 45 dollars per bag. So therefore, it makes sense. It makes logical sense for us in Trinidad and Tobago to have public procurement and a proper public procurement legislation, which will call for tendering, evaluation, and then award, as compared to the provision of services where suppliers and contractors are sole selected by friends and family. We have with us joining on the link now former Senator Tahaka Obika. Mr. Obika, can you give us your thoughts on this latest gutter of the procurement legislation?
Well, good night, MP Anaram, and your viewers on the live stream. I first want to begin by, of course, offering my condolences to joining the political leader and offering my condolences to the family of former Minister of Energy Franklin Khan. I mean, I served with him in the 11th Parliament, and also I attended UWI St. Augustine and studied economics with his son. So to his family, pay my respects. Now, basically, procurement. There are three main ways in which they have gutted the legislation. One, in terms of the definition of bid rigging. If you look at the definition that they introduced, it is not as specific and in terms of the purposes of it. So initially, bid rigging would really be targeting persons who are trying to influence unduly the process of awarding and disbursing of contracts. What they've changed the definition to now is anti-competitive behavior. In essence, what they have done is water down an important part of this process, because when you were giving the backdrop of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act, you spoke about what happened during the time of Calder Hart, and Calder Hart was synonymous with state sector nefarious activity. Once you mention the name Calder Hart from 2008, 2009, 2010, it could have only meant one thing. And if you were to paraphrase Keith Rowley, who at that time was an opposition member of parliament, not the opposition leader, he accused the government at the time, led by the late Patrick Manning, of engaging in bid rigging. So the definition of bid rigging is very important to this piece of legislation. And it was in the Parent Act that was approved during the time of the People's Partnership Government, with input from civil society and the Joint Consultative Council and the Chambers of Commerce and so on, where bid rigging ensured that the perpetrators of influencing disbursement of contracts will be caught. But by changing that definition to anti-competitive behavior, as we say in Trinidad, is a very airy-fairy definition. To use the layman expression, it doesn't necessarily help to find and prosecute persons who are engaged in bid rigging. And it can't be lost on any of us that the Prime Minister who oversaw this change, this watering down of this specific definition, was the person who himself made the term popular, that is Keith Rowley, when he was in the opposition and he had fell out of favor with the then Prime Minister, Patrick Manning. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is the exemptions for arrangements and contracts that have foreign origins or foreign stakeholders. So where you have international lending agency or where you have a government-to-government arrangement. So when you listen to the government and you listen to the Attorney General and you listen to the members of Cabinet, what they are saying is, they don't want in the PNM to have our strict and robust, independent office of the procurement regulator, who I see has some vacancies, which is very interesting at this time, that they can actually have vacancies in an office that's supposed to be the watchdog for procurement in this country. But anyway, the office that is independent, this government does not want them to have their hands on contracts that originate with foreign governments. So they could go and cut a deal with DLC in Venezuela. They could cut a deal with a politician in Australia if they want to purchase vessels. They can cut a deal with an international lending agency, for example, the Andina Bank in South America. They can cut a deal with anybody. Once a stakeholder party to this transaction is a foreign party, whether it's a government or an international lending agency that is party to this contract, they are not required to go by the watchdog, the bulldog, the office of the procurement regulator. In fact, it is exempt, so they will just organize it in cabinet. So the partners in cabinet, the Minister of Finance will now be the regulator. So it's himself to himself. There's a councillor in the Kuva Tabaki Talpara Corporation, and she said it well. The cutting track for Gucci to run. All right? I think Ms. Balmati was the person who said that. So this government, in local parlance, cutting track for Gucci to run when it comes to contracts. So a vessel, so what does that mean? A vessel that could have costed $500 million could cost $1 billion. And there's no way to scrutinize and check and double check and cross with T's and dot I's and measure twice before you cut once, as tailors would tell you is important in this country. And what that means to the average family is that tablet that you wanted for your child, they will now tell you that there is insufficient funds. You're going to go to the ATM with your machine, your bank card before the month end to see if you get salary yet. And if the machine says insufficient funds to complete this transaction, they will tell you, the average citizen, that your child's education has to be put on hold. The 33,500 families whose children do not have devices, your child's education has to be put on hold because here's what happened. They engage in some contract to buy some items from overseas, and corruption was part of that arrangement that made the contract inflate by $50 million, by $100 million. And what ended up jumping up in a steel band and tongue is your children's future. For the taxi driver who want to know what this whole thing had to do with me. If the government have one pot to spend from, and corruption, which is a tax on your savings, on your national treasury, corruption is that tax, then they're going to be taken from that pot of savings, that national treasury, the money you need as a taxi driver to pave your road. So you don't have to buy new shocks every 3 months on the bad roads that we have in this country. If you are someone waiting for an HGC house, and corruption in buying these vessels from a government arrangement prevents the government from finding an additional $500 million, or from buying airplanes for Caribbean Airlines, or for buying buses for PTSC. Corruption in any of these buying schemes, if there were to be corruption in these schemes, because the government you can't test it. You can't go to an independent regulator and check, is the cabinet himself to himself and herself. Your extra money that you need for CDAP medication, insufficient funds. For your children's education and scholarship program, insufficient funds. So the reality is, this affects every citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. But it is very important that we break it down at that level, and to remind persons who are listening, who are watching online, that our political leader has a petition that will be taken to Parliament, that you have the opportunity to sign. And if you have already signed in your constituency, you can encourage your friends, your family, to sign at the constituency that they reside in, because we have these forms here, there, and everywhere for you to sign. Whether it's Ikakas or Shagaramas, or Mayaro, or Tuku. The important thing to remember is procurement, without being regulated, opens the door for corruption, cutting track for goody to run. And that is a tax on our national treasury, which prevents you from getting money for roads, for lights, for healthcare. And if you're waiting for a HGC house, HGCs, so that they can get the money to build more houses and apartments for you and your family to live in.
Quite instructive, former Senator Tahaka Obika. And what you have indicated there is our national budget is not unlimited. We're always constrained by our budgets, and therefore what we have or what we are able to spend must be spent in the best possible way. Now, you have described something there in terms of, some services which are exempted from the ambit of the procurement regulator. And having worked in quite a number of state enterprises, I can tell you that it is the auditors, the auditing function, that will normally pick up if there are anything untowards happening in an organization. Now, if you are then making a circular argument where you are solely selecting persons for financial services and legal services, and then also the auditing services, the auditors in an organization are the watchdog for any untowards and any corrupt activities taking place within the organization. But you are making a circular type arrangement where you are sole selecting these people, and therefore it leaves room for things to go haywire. And that is one of the dangers in this latest amendment, which gutted many of the clauses which were passed in 2015. At this point in time, let me just bring in Councillor Lizama into the discussion. He is also a small contractor, and he is someone who is also bid for projects that are in the public domain, and ask him whether, in terms of equity, how will this affect small contractors where some services are exempted and some are not, and his thoughts generally on the latest gotten of the procurement legislation.
To the viewing public, Chairman Henry Awong from the Kuva Tabaki Talpa Regional Corporation, and all those viewing on the virtual. MP Ram, let me start by saying, based on the present legislation as it is now, small contractors like me and others are faced with an uphill task to really fall in this procurement system as it is now. Everything is based on who you know and where you're going to stop the bid rigging, as former Senator Tahaka said. Take for instance, there was this Chinese firm here signed a contract for 5,000 units. No procurement. That was just based solely and solely on the Prime Minister, and somebody negotiated that deal. We have the no man's land, where prime property was real estate was going to be given for next to nothing. Based on these sort of arrangements, small contractors, basically they could have come in here with their entire group, hire nobody, and the small man remain at the bottom again. And when you look in terms like these sort of thing, and you have no details based on what these contracts entails, is something for not only small contractors, but it would affect every contractor in Trinidad and Tobago. Take for instance that Mr. Arthur Raymond had to go to the courts to get details on the no man's land, that scandals, any way you want to put it. Those are the things that without proper procurement, you cannot have no oversight over these things. And it's basically all these things that just keep propping up. Case in point, you could look at Greenvale. Greenvale flooded when everybody telling you there is a flood prone zone, that you cannot do this, you cannot do that. Yet they went about with it. You don't know who was the contractor, who got paid, who did what. And those are the things that with this procurement legislation, where it watered down to everybody, that we are faced with on a daily basis now in terms of who bidding for who. If you look at Transparency International and the way they approach things, just in 2019, Trinidad was ranked 86th. Is that good for a country like ours? Just the other day, you had, a couple of years ago, you had the plant that blew up in Point up here there, Nightquan, everybody estimated to cost something like 30-something million. Yet for all, Nightquan went away with $10 million. Who look at those things? So basically, the small man will just be constantly be fighting for the scrums, where sometimes it wouldn't have none. And what I am saying is that if the small contractors do not get up and put their signature to this petition and say, hey, we had enough of this, we would not be going anywhere. If you look, like Senator Obika was talking about, call the heart name, and you know what corruption is about. But I'd like to take you back to the beginning 1980, 81 with the Caroni Racing Complex. It had contractors that didn't own a piece of equipment. Yet for all, they were given contracts. Proper procurement, that could have never happened. And this will go on and on. Once you have a government thinking this way, we will go on and on with this. Like you said, that things that is exempted from the procurement officer, it leaves everything for the minister to decide. So if I and the minister is friend, basically I am in the game. If I is a friend of a minister, a friend of a friend of a friend, basically I am in the game. So where does that leave the small man who is independent? So this is things that we have to look at at a serious level to think if we really want this procurement as it is, or if we want to move Trinidad and Tobago forward. Unless we think in a positive way and independent, this is not no UNC procurement legislation. This is procurement legislation for the country. And this is where we're supposed to be looking at, that it goes to the country.
Thank you for your thoughts, Councillor Lizama. And that is what it is really. There will be inequity for those who are providing services of legal services, financial services, auditing services as compared to contractors, those who are paving roads, those who are involved in civil works. They will have to go through a process, and the process is something that we are advocating for, because the literature is there, the history is there, that when there's accountability and transparency, we will get value for money as a country. Now, in the past, and when this legislation was coming to Parliament, by Public Advisory number 15, the Office of the Procurement Regulator, this is what they had to say. It says the OPR, meaning the Office of the Procurement Regulator, maintains its position as a result of the following considerations. A thorough consultative process was undertaken between 2018 to present, this is to December 2020, with stakeholders across various sectors who provided feedback to the OPR from our 20 workshops, 193 bespoke sensitization sessions, and webinars held with over 1,400 suppliers or contractors. During these consultations, stakeholders reiterated that there should be no amendment to Section 7 as it stands. Number 2, stakeholders emphasized that Section 7 should be given an opportunity to be tested, since there's a real possibility that the local suppliers and the contractors may be deprived of a fair and equitable chance to participate in procurement proceedings. So this is the words, or are the words, of an independent institution in Trinidad and Tobago, the Office of the Procurement Regulator. And they are saying, based on all their stakeholder consultations, everyone, it seems unanimously, were against the same the same amendments to Section 7 by the new Section 5 of the 2020 Amendment Bill. So, Councillor Awang, Chairman Awang, was your organization one of those in which the Office of the Procurement Regulator had consultation with? And what was the result and some of the discussion that took place during that time?
Interactive session. He then came to we invited him to the Cuba Tabaki Talpa Regional Corporation where he came. And I just want to tell you, and I'll listen to my colleague, Councillor John Lizama, who is speaking here this evening as a small contractor. And I'm not sure if he can remember this, but the procurement regulator did indicate to us that the corporation under the legislation we can, as a policy decision, decide on to categorize contractors into large, medium, and small. Actually, that will do a lot for small contractors. It will give them an opportunity to survive in a very vicious market at this point in time, because of the fact that nothing much is happening with the economy. Big contractors are now competing at the regional corporation level. For small, sometimes contractors is under 100,000, because they are competing there, actually pushing the small man out of business. Now the small man operates from within a community, so he'll hire the fellas on the corner, on the block, and so on to ensure that they get some work within the communities. So when that happened, it have a direct impact on the various communities. So the idea of categorizing contractors into large, medium, and small will augur well for the small and medium contractors. The other thing I want to talk about, what he indicated to us, is that we can actually zone contractors too. So the corporation can take a decision under the legislation to decide that we are only going to award contracts to contractors that operate within the region. Now, there are 14 municipalities in Trinidad, which more or less, we have some issues with regards to the amount of funding for corporation, but all regional corporations will have funding for projects. If we zone contractors, then it will lend give that kind of impact into various communities where we can stimulate local economic development within communities in the region. And as you know, I'm an advocate for local economic development within the region of Cuba, Tabaki, Talparo, and that is something I would be paying particular attention to see if we can bring that into the fore. Let's discuss it, let's talk about it, let's see the impact what it have within various communities. So the procurement regulator did meet with us. We raised concern, we raised question. He advised properly. As a matter of fact, with regards to how you dispose of state assets, that's something we spoke about too at this meeting. He did indicate to us that, well, as it is now, to discard or dispose anything at the corporation, be it a chair, a table, be it a old computer, printer, or a vehicle, the process now is that it has to go to the boards of survey. Under the legislation, the corporation can do those things, can dispose of those assets, of course, with the guidance of the procurement regulator and the legislation, right? So I just want to say there is need for institutional strengthening. There is need for capacity building at the corporations. As a matter of fact, when the procurement regulator visited us, he said to us, it's time we start putting a procurement department in place. We were in the process of doing that. We are in the process of doing that. As it is now, we just have a tenders clerk who will invite tenders and so on. But we would there's a need for the people who has the expertise, who are qualified in those areas, to set up a procurement department at the regional corporations throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Well, Trinidad.
Chairman Awang, you raised something that is very interesting, and it's something that the PNM has sought to do now with this latest amendment. They have moved to a place where they are saying the disposal of state assets, real property owned by the government, does not form under the purview and ambit of the procurement regulator. They have removed that oversight. So what that means is that if they want to sell Petrotrin or they want to sell Wassa, they can do so without proper tendering and the procurement. Whether the Prime Minister, like he did, had breakfast with one gentleman and decided that we were going to have a sandal in Tobago. So whoever it is, they have removed that supervision from the procurement regulator, and therefore is something that is very dangerous. So I'll ask former Senator Tahaka Obika his views on the removal of the disposal of state assets from the ambit of the procurement regulator.
So, well, state assets is a broad thing because if you look at the balance sheet of the country, where the government is concerned, you have land. So, state lands falls under consideration for an asset. And you know, with land distribution, you'd want that to be something that is done with the most amount of sunlight to illuminate and cover to block any opportunity for darkness to enter. Then you have, of course, physical property on these lands. You have bungalows, for instance, with petition properties. Those are houses and townhouses and bungalows that you have on the former petition lands that are worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Then, of course, you have the pipeline infrastructure. So whether it be sold as scrap iron or sold because it has operational value from Petrotrin, from Wassa, what have you. These things, if they are disposed of callously, basically, in effect, is theft. Because you could sell, for example, a bungalow could sell easily for $5 million, but if it goes out of the ambit of the procurement regulator, they could dispose of it for $2 million. If you multiply it by 100 bungalows, the country loses $300 million, which can build, we know, the amount of houses that can build if we have a housing shortage, as we do. Another point, when you took the first round of comments, and you spoke about the audit function. So the audit function is retrospective, which is excellent, but the procurement function is progressive. It takes, as we say in Trinidad, in front first. All right? So it serves as the first filter for any opportunity for corruption to be blocked, so that they don't have to wait until the money has already been spent, all right, on the thing it was supposed to be spent on or entered some financier's pocket, for you to now conduct an audit, sometimes years down the road, for someone to pick up on as was done with Petrotrin, with the fake oil scandal. It was an audit function in retrospect after the theft was already committed, as we say allegedly. All right? But if you have the procurement function doing its job at the beginning and the audit function at the end, it will be very difficult for someone to steal and not make a jail in this country if they are doing their jobs. What this government has done, we move government to government, we move international lending agencies, we move disposal of state assets, we move legal services, we move medical services, and as you say, any other service that they may feel they don't want the autonomous, independent office of the procurement regulator to have his hands and his eyes scrutinizing. Basically, what they have done is given themselves in the PNM a license for rampant theft. And who benefits? The average citizen, the public servant, doesn't have a financier in his back pocket. The average citizen, the taxi driver, the teacher, they don't have a wife to collect state contracts. You understand? The average citizen who is the business person, they don't have the friend of a cabinet minister to pocket hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' monies. So the average citizen does not benefit. The average citizen is worse off where corruption occurs and the way it is happening. But as we say in Trinidad, time longer than twine. The longest road has an end. But this road for this amendment in procurement, in the regulation, in the laws that were into force in 2014, that simply required full proclamation. The amendments that the PNM brought, the latest one being in December last year, that road has come to an end. And we are calling on all citizens to join with your member of parliament or your UNC activist in your community. Sign this petition and support our political leader to get the repeal of this procurement amendment and bring back the full clauses and sections of the law that was passed when the People's Partnership Government was in office, that got the support then of the Joint Consultative Council, of the Chambers of Commerce, of the Manufacturers Association, and of civil society. And MP, I thank you for having this forum. It's good that our citizens in Cuba would benefit from this intervention on your part.
Thank you for your perspective, Tahaka Obika. You know, as a practicing attorney at law, there's something that we are quite familiar with when reading legislation, and it is really either the purposeful approach or the in terms of how we, what is the purpose of legislation. And one thing that I am really amazed by or bemused by or bewildered by is the fact that a government will say to you, such other services as the minister may by order determine. Now, yes, we may have a very sinless minister of finance. I mean, that is open for debate. But what happens when somebody else is in the chair? You must legislate now. You must legislate now for when evil is at work, whether it be the person of Colin Imbert or whoever else. You must legislate so that there is certainty in the law and there is protection for all of Trinidad and Tobago. Not that you're saying that the person who holds that position of Minister of Finance will be sinless as the current Minister of Finance. So that is one area where I think is open so much other services being added on, and it's being added on by negative resolution, which means that for someone to bring it up in the public domain or in Parliament, there must be a motion that must be moved in Parliament, as opposed to positive resolution. Had it been positive resolution, it would have meant that the matter or the services which was to be added would have to come to Parliament first and get approval of Parliament before it is exempted as the others, and that is very frightening. And again, it can lead to a myriad of wastage, of corruption, of persons unable to access basic health, basic needs and safety in our country at the expense of the minister having sole select contracts with friends, family, financiers and wives. Because we have seen just lately where the wife of the Attorney General was able to be recruited by the office of the Prime Minister to fight someone who is eligible for a scholarship, to fight you, Trinidad and Tobago. They're using your resources, they're using your taxpayers' monies, paying themselves and their friends and family to fight you for things that you are duly entitled to. So I just ask Councillor Lizama his views on the opening up of the exemption by the minister, in that he can add any service at his whim and fancy. Councillor Lizama.
Thank you, MP. I would like to take you back to an article that was written on the 13th of September 2019, and it goes like this: government cancellation of a 71.7 million US contract between China Company and the Housing Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, Housing Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago. will not affect any penalty, attract any penalties. Now, to hear something like that, that is very frightening. This contract was done without proper procurement. At the end of the day, if that attract any penalties, who have to pay? Is it the government going to pay or the taxpayers have to pay? And these are the things that we have to look at carefully. And if you go down, and I encourage anybody to get a hold of this article, and where he was questioning the Minister of Finance, he can answer. If the Minister of Finance cannot answer, would I be able to answer? And those are the things that make this legislation very hard for poor people to swallow. This is legislation only for friends and family. And we have to be careful what we approve. Remember, mind you, this legislation was passed in both houses. This was passed in both houses, watered down as it may be. It was passed in both houses. So if by some chance now this procurement legislation is assented to, we are saddled with this burden for the rest of our lives. Now, according to the saying, the old people might say, I live my life, I going. But what about the younger children and the generation to come? Would they be able to pay this? This is you talking about a $71.1 million contract, US dollar. This is not TT dollars that we are faced with. If any contract have to come up with this and we have to pay, who paying it? I would, like I said in closing, every taxpayer, once government, and not only taxpayer but every citizen, once government keep borrowing in any ad hoc manner, the country will suffer gravely for this. And I hope that, as Senator Taraka Obika said, look for the petition. We go into the parliament with the petition, and make sure you get your name on it. People power rules. Always remember that. MP, I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As I say, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. I just have one or two small contributions again with respect to this procurement legislation, and one in particular is where public-private partnerships are now exempt again. Now, how can this work? We have seen with the advent of Nike One, and I believe somebody mentioned it before, where there was an upfront payment of $10 million US and $25 million by preference shares. We don't know the value of these shares, right? So it's 25 million preference shares. We don't know the value of these shares, but we have offered to Nike One a state entity or state plant which cost in excess of $3 billion. In the Malcolm Jones days, $3 billion was spent on the World GTL plant. We have offered that to Nike One at an upfront payment of 10 million US and 25 million in preference shares. And therefore, that is a public-private partnership which has gone wrong, in my view. Additionally, any other entity that is state-owned, for the share of one share the government retains, it now becomes, or two shares, it becomes a private-public partnership because the government is retaining a share. So therefore, it doesn't mean that the government has to have majority shareholding all the time. It just means that some share or some one share, two shares are retained and becomes public partnership, which are then again exempted from the ambit of the procurement regulator and from proper procurement practice. And that is something that, when I say you're selling out the crown jewels of the country, you're selling out the assets of the country, what will the next generation do, and how will they be able to survive? So that is one thing again that has to be highlighted. There are so many things that is wrong with this legislation that if we were to discuss every aspect of it, we'll be here for many hours and probably into tomorrow. But we have basically come to the end of our presentation of why repeal the procurement legislation, Caroni Central Edition. I want to thank immensely the presenters here this afternoon, Councillor and Chairman Henry Awong, Councillor John Lizama, and joining us virtually, Tahaka Obika, economist and banker. I want to thank you immensely, and may you all have a safe journey home, and we'll look out for the next edition of why repeal the procurement legislation, and the day we look forward to our political leader laying in Parliament the respective bill and or motion to repeal this draconian piece of legislation that has been gutted, has been watered down, and has been withered away by this wicked, incompetent PNM government. I thank you and good night.
No high UNC official met any PDP official.
You don't need the UNC to pass the bill.
This is the worst and they need to go.
Fire burn you, Guardian. How much more could we tolerate?
You lack the intellect and the competence.
Everywhere else is vaccinating except Trinidad and Tobago.
You cannot pay people money that you owe them.